What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. I really appreciate you tuning in today. As you can tell, we are back in my 2006 Nissan 350z rev up, and we're going to be talking about something really important. I get this question all the time in my comments and in my DMs on Instagram. Johnny, can you make a 350z buyer's guide? Just a buyer's guide on what you should know, maybe what you should look for specifically when you're going to check out one of the 350zs that you found. You know, there's actually a lot of things that I didn't know when I went and looked at this Z that I wish I would have known. Hopefully this video will kind of give you like an overall idea of what you should look for when you're going to check it out. So, okay, so let's start at the very beginning. You just found a Nissan 350z, you want to go check it out, you schedule a time to go look at it with somebody. I would highly recommend bringing somebody that knows a lot about cars, or at least, you know, can point out things that you might not have seen while you're like, you know, making the deal and the offer and stuff like that. But I would highly recommend going to check out the car in the morning and when the car's cold. If the car's warm and running, you know, things can be, you know, things kind of change when the car's warm, like coolant and oil and everything. So I would definitely recommend to try and look at the car when it's cold. You'll get a great idea of like a baseline of where the oil is, if they've done an oil change, if it needs oil. Kind of going along with the oil, when you check the oil with a dipstick, if the oil is kind of frothy looking, that can be a sign of like a crack in the head gasket or head gasket failure, as well as like metallic pieces inside the oil. There shouldn't be any like metallic flake inside your oil at all. I don't know what it is about the VQ in specific, but these engines kind of turn the oil black really quickly. So if it looks just terribly black, it probably isn't too bad, but I would definitely ask them at what intervals they did oil changes and stuff and when the most recent one was. If you're specifically looking at a 2005 or an 06, those 350zs tend to burn more oil than the other ones. The engine breathes more freely. There's a variable valve timing on the intake side they added, and some other bells and whistles basically to the engine. This actually resulted in some, you know, different pressures inside the engine, resulting in like oil being sucked into the combustion chamber and stuff. So 05 and 06, they tend to burn a little bit more oil, but it's nothing that, you know, you shouldn't buy an 05 or an 06 car. These cars are totally good. Mine's actually an 06, like I said at the beginning. I've had no issues at all, and the 06 has a little bit more horsepower, so you know, I don't know if that's a plus. It's a plus in my mind. It's a plus in my mind. Now that we just talked about the oil, while we're still under the hood, let's look at the cooling system. I would highly recommend looking at the cooling system while the car is cold, and then also while the car is warm after you do a test drive. The cooling system goes under a whole bunch of changes when the car is warm and running. So I would highly recommend checking both. Definitely check to see all the lines are connected, if all the hoses are dried out, if they need to be replaced. You know, usually you can finagle price a little bit if hoses need to be replaced and they're dried out and cracking. Right when I got this car, I actually had to replace the thermostat, and the guy didn't tell me about it, or maybe he didn't know. I just noticed the car's temperature started to increase over time. Basically what you can do to check to see if your car needs a new thermostat is you can open the hood, reach down while the car is warm and running, and feel the hoses that run in and out of the radiator. If one of them is cold, usually the one going into the radiator, the thermostat is not telling the valve to open to let more coolant in. So you should notice pretty quickly your car will start to overheat. So like I said, check the cooling system before and after you drive. If you're wondering why I keep looking down at my crotch, I got all my notes right here. This is my high school math book. Actually, no, this is my old math book from high school. This is actually my philosophy and logic book. Another thing about the coolant levels is when you're checking the coolant inside of the coolant reservoir, make sure it's not too low. And then especially when you start the car, you'll notice that the coolant, if it drops significantly after the car started, usually a sign that you need to add coolant or it's leaking coolant somewhere. Something to note, a good way to tell if the car's overheated previously in the past is if the coolant expansion tank is either warped or cracked. It's usually a good sign that the car overheated or got too hot. So definitely look at that. This is specific to the HR, which is an 07 and 08, partially 09. Listen to the radiator fans. For some reason, they're known to go out. I don't know if it's just like a fuse issue or something, but I've just heard that the radiator fans can tend to go out in the HRs sometimes. So, you know, listen for those fans to come on, because, you know, the car, they won't come on obviously until the car is warm. So another good sign that the car overheated previously in its life is that the appearance of the coolant will actually look like brown or muddy, and it'll just look like it got really, really hot basically and burnt the coolant. So that's the first 2 pages. And then I have this second 2 pages. That's basically the cooling system. I can't really think of anything else. Usually the car won't tend to leak when the car is running, and it'll leak when it's cool, when it's like off. So check to see if anything starts leaking after the fact, after you drove it. You know, wait around a little bit, see if things start dripping. You know, that's usually when it'll start happening. Things pressurize and then depressurize, and then that's when leaks happen. I get this question a lot, if Zs have like timing belts or timing chain issues. Luckily, Nissan 350z actually has a timing chain and not a belt, so you don't have to experience all the problems with belts. And luckily the timing chain should last the entire length of the engine. Nissan says in the manual that it should last the whole engine. If you do need to change the timing chain, it's usually not until like way later, like 180,000 plus miles usually. And the nice thing is, if you're constantly changing your oil on time and doing the proper intervals and changing your oil filter when you need to be, most timing chain issues come from lack of proper oil maintenance. So keep up with changing the oil and stuff like that, and you should have no issues at all with your timing chain. Another thing is you'll start to notice that your idle oil pressure will probably dip down below like between like 5 and 10 psi. I would do an oil change or maybe change the weight of the oil to something a little thicker before, you know, doing an entire timing chain maintenance, because that is huge in this car. So ask them if they've done the spark plugs. In the Nissan manual, it says the spark plugs should be checked and redone between 75 and 100k miles. You know, most Z's are getting to 100k mile mark, so you know, I would definitely ask them and, you know, check them out. Really quick, the stock OEM spark plugs, if you want to rechange them and go online and order them, our part number is NGK PLFR5A-11. They probably need to be done if it's been over 100k miles. And as far as exhausts go, obviously these are Japanese tuning sports cars, so most of them have aftermarket exhausts, but if you do find one with a stock exhaust, make sure to just check underneath, do a real quick overlook of just if it's been hit on anything, you know, if they've reversed into a parking spot and accidentally drove it back up onto the curb and almost ripped the exhaust off. You should be able to see damage like that pretty easily. Huge dents in the exhaust kit, anywhere in like the muffler or the catalytic converter and stuff like that, is probably a pretty good sign that they were either, you know, pretty careless in driving over certain things, which is kind of worrisome in a way, but there shouldn't be any issues. Look for rust while you're down there, because if the car is anywhere in the East Coast, you know, salt on the roads, because they put salt down to like melt snow and help with, you know, ice, and salt and water together on metal cause like extreme corrosion and stuff like that. So definitely look to see in the wheel wells and stuff if there's any, you know, rusted out pieces that need to be replaced soon, because that could be a big deal later on and very expensive, like on the horizon. You know, you look out in the distance, it's very expensive to replace rusty parts. So talking about the exhaust, we'll stay back there. If you notice any different smokes coming from the exhaust, if it's white smoke, it's probably either condensation if it's really cold outside, if it doesn't last for very long, of course. If the white smoke continues, it's either one of two things, or two of two things, I guess, if it's really bad. If it smells kind of sweet, it can be coolant being burned, which, you know, is possible. And if it doesn't smell sweet and it's still white, then it could be water in the cylinders, which probably indicates a blown head gasket. You know, that's a big deal. Blown head gasket, you know, you'd have to just fix that. It'd cost a lot. If the smoke is blue smoke usually appears only when you're driving. Have someone follow you in the car behind you, or have the owner drive it and then you follow him and have him go through the entire rev range. If there's blue smoke being thrown basically at any RPM, that's usually a sign of like worn piston rings or valve seals and stuff like that. Two things: if you're in 6th gear in overdrive and you see blue smoke, as well as on startup, just like while it's cold, it usually means that the car was completely thrashed by the owner previously. Pretty much. I mean, maybe not, but the odds are pretty big, because if you think about it, to really destroy piston rings and valve seals and stuff like that, you have to get the engine really hot, and you know, you have to just be thrashing on it. If you see black smoke, usually the car's running too rich. You're either burning too much fuel. The first thing I would check is like your intake components, as well as your air filter. So if your air filter is blocked or it's clogged or something, it'll cause like pressure difference, and it'll be sucking too much fuel inside. So, you know, just double check your air filter and intake components and stuff like that. The car should just start right up. There should be like no hesitation. That's usually really weird. And if you see any smoke at all when the owner revs it, so have him rev it, you know, 5-6K just to give it a good one. And if you see any colored smoke at all, I would just highly recommend to just find a different Z, because, you know, it could seriously mean so many different things, and it shouldn't blow any different colored smoke. Like, I'll rev it here in a second and there's no smoke at all. So, you know, just something to remember. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was like braking. If the car's been sitting for a long time, you could have a seized caliper. So if you're driving it on the test drive and you notice that the car's pulling to one side, it's probably because the caliper is seized, hasn't been used for a while. You'll also notice that right when you pull away for the first time, you'll hear a huge clunking sound. That's probably because the caliper is seized, and you'll need new calipers. Calipers can cost a whole bunch of money. When you're testing the braking, test under soft braking and hard braking too, because under soft braking you won't necessarily feel it, but hard braking, if you brake hard and the steering wheel starts to shake, usually means you have like warped rotors, and you know, you'll have to replace those soon. It usually happens because of high speed braking. You know, someone, if they're constantly braking into corners at high speeds and having to slam the brakes, that excess heat will literally warp the rotors quite a bit, and you'll feel it. Like, even in my car, I feel it. So I think it happened for me, you know, it just happens. That's why Brembos cost a lot, because you don't get that. That doesn't happen. So, I mean, seized calipers, steering wheel, let's see, fumes. Correct idle speed for a car, you know, when it's idling and warm, should be between 700 and 800. If it's idling higher than that or lower than that, it's kind of weird. All right, guys, so that's basically it. This was a huge, long video, and I hope you have like a page full of notes right now. Thank you so much for watching to the end of it. I hope you guys learned something. I actually learned a whole bunch about the Nissan 350z making this video too. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and drop a video idea down below if you have anything or have any questions or any comments. I'll go ahead and do my best to answer them for you. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, I would highly recommend you doing that and joining the family. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.